Chapter 41. I might have a way to help you, but it won't be easy, Nick said with a thoughtful expression. Horua opened his eyes widely in surprise. You do? He asked. Nick nodded. I mean, I'm the chief Zephyx extractor in a company. And we still need to optimize the Zephyx production of one of our specters. Horua, would you be interested in becoming a Zephyx extractor? Nick asked. Horua's eyes opened even more, but this time, with wonder. Me? A Zephyx extractor? Nick nodded with a smile. Why not? But I just turned 11, Horua said with a bit of nervousness. Nick just laughed. So? Why not start early? Even more, it's not even difficult to work with that specter, you basically just have to fall asleep in its presence. Additionally, since your Zephyx synchronizer hasn't been attuned yet, you should also get a nice ability from it. As long as you don't die, nothing bad can happen. Horua looked at Nick like he couldn't believe what he had just heard. Are you sure? Can I really become a Zephyx extractor? Of course, Nick said with a chuckle. You will gain an ability, a stable job, and lots of money. You might not earn as much as me, but you will still earn more than everyone in the dregs. Horua started to jump up and down in excitement. Thank you. Thank you so much. You're the best, Nick. Nick just laughed some more. He always enjoyed it when Horua was excited. Due to Horua's bad situation, he was rarely happy whenever Nick wasn't present. Horua was worried and stressed. He even had trouble sleeping due to all the pressure. Anyway, I apparently have 3 days of vacation for now, which means I can't take you there right now, but after my vacation is over, I'll take you to your future workplace. You're going to see a real specter, Horua, Nick said with a laugh. Wow, a real specter, Horua echoed in wonder. The two of them talked some more, but a couple of minutes later, Nick left the house again. Earlier, Nick had felt aimless. He hadn't known what he should do with his newfound freedom, but now that problem had been solved, Nick could use his position to help one of his friends out. It feels good to do good deeds. Now, since the problem with Horua has been solved, I should take a look at some houses in the outer city. Nick thought with excitement, but before long, Nick stopped. Grumble, you know, I'm actually quite hungry. I think I haven't eaten anything in like a day or so. Nick thought, what do I want to eat today? Rat? Fly? Some veggie cubes from the market? I can now buy a lot of them with my money. I could also go with rust mushroom, but I don't really want to. It tastes a bit too acidic for me. Although, the house does have a ripe colony of rust mushrooms, and if I don't eat it soon, it will turn toxic and start releasing toxic spores. Nick scratched the back of his neck. I should just check out the market, he thought with a shrug. Nick changed direction and walked towards the market of the dregs. As soon as he arrived, most people turned to him. Why was a Zephyx extractor here? Nick tried his best to ignore the stares, but they still pulled his mood down a bit. In the end, Nick entered one of the shops at the side of the market. He had only gone into some of them due to a job, but he had never bought anything there. The things in these shops were just too expensive. The shop Nick had entered had many different pieces of food lying around. There was rat, cat, dog, fly, and bird, and they even had several different kinds of veggie cubes. The selection was amazing. How can I help you, sir? The owner of the shop asked Nick as soon as he entered. Hey, I'm hungry. Do you have anything good to eat? He asked. The owner of the shop looked with confusion and suspicion at Nick. Yes. But I'm not sure if my wares have the quality your tongue desires, sir, he said with a bitter smile. Nick just waved his hand to signal that it wasn't a big deal. Just tell me what tastes good in here. The owner of the shop became more nervous. Well, I made a new cauldron of veggie cube soup. I'm not sure if sir is interested in veggie cubes, though sir is probably more familiar with real vegetables. Real vegetables? Nick repeated with surprise. Oh, right? I totally forgot that there are supposed to be real vegetables somewhere. Do you have any? The shop owner became more nervous. This Zephyx extractor was acting very strangely. Was this some kind of scheme or technique to get some information out of the shop owner? The extractor's conduct made no sense. Nevertheless, the shop owner had no chance but to go along with it. Sadly, no sir, the shop owner said. No one in the dregs would buy them due to the price. Oh, okay, Nick said. Then give me some of that veggie cube soup. Of course, sir, the shop owner said as he quickly walked over to a cauldron. The owner took the lid off, and Nick could smell the aroma. It smelled absolutely amazing. The next moment, the owner took out a bowl made of rusty metal and scooped some of the soup out of the cauldron. That will be 10 credits, sir, the owner said nervously as he put the bowl down on the counter. 10 credits were 10 of the monthly tax. Only rich people in the dregs could afford to eat something this luxurious. The majority of the shop's customers probably came from the gangs. Nick took out the card he had received from Winter and placed it on the counter. When the shop owner saw the card, he smiled bitterly. Sir, we can't trade with bank cards in the dregs. I'm not allowed to collect the outstanding balance from the banks since I am living in the dregs. Chapter 42. Nick exited the shop with a bowl of veggie cube soup in his hands. When Nick had canceled the order after realizing that he couldn't pay, the owner said that the bowl was on the house as a practical person. Nick saw no problem with that and simply accepted happily. Nick also told the owner that he could ask Nick for help if there was anything he needed. After leaving the marketplace quite quickly, Nick looked at the bowl of veggie cube soup in his hands with wonder. In the dregs, the people mostly ate meat, rat, cat, dog, insects, and so on. However, it was also necessary to eat some veggie cubes every now and then. Veggie cubes were green cubes made of different vegetables which could no longer be sold in the outer city. When vegetables started to go bad, the shops sold them to one of the gangs, which then collected them all, threw them into some kind of furnace, and cooked them until there was zero water left in them. One cube weighed about 100 grams and cost a credit. It was expensive. Because of that, the people in the dregs only ate them once a week or so. If they didn't, they would start to show various signs of malnourishment. The bowl of veggie cube soup was beige in color, and there was some kind of oily layer on top, which seemed to have separated from the soup. The cubes had turned into slimy and mushy bits that swam in the beige broth. Nick could also see a couple of mosquito larvae swimming in the broth. These were not the larvae of normal mosquitoes but the larvae of the mosquitoes that belonged to the specter. The mosquitoes of the specter continually reproduced, and apparently the specter didn't mind if anyone ate the larvae. In fact, they mostly could be found in the dregs. And they were very healthy, but they were also expensive. The larvae from these mosquitoes were much bigger than the ones from normal mosquitoes. Each one was around 5 centimeters long. When Nick saw the soup, he knew that he was holding something of extremely high class in his hands. No wonder this thing is so expensive. Nick thought with wonder. It has 4 or 5 larvae and probably over 300 grams of veggie cubes. That's enough food for 2 to 3 days. Nick slowly pushed the bowl to his mouth and drank the warm broth. The fat had separated from the water, and the larvae had a bitter and metallic taste to them. The distant taste of vegetables could also be slightly discerned. Nick closed his eyes in bliss. It was amazing. He had never eaten anything this good in his entire life. Also, what is this strong taste? I can't put my finger on it. Wait, is that Ruslick? In Nick's mind appeared the image of a big rock standing near the edge of the city. That rock was made from a magical mineral that could treat some special conditions that caused dizziness, nausea, and vomiting. The people just needed to lick the rock for a bit and they would feel better. Nick had heard some people refer to it as salt, but it was commonly known as Ruslick since people licked it off a dirty stone, putting Ruslick into a soup. That's genius. Nick thought, it tastes so amazing. Over the next hour, Nick slowly consumed the broth, and after he was done, he felt so incredibly good. Nick felt like his body was telling him how happy it was. This is the life, Nick thought in satisfaction. If I could eat this soup every day, I could die happy. A moment later, Nick yawned. Man, now I'm getting tired. Guess I should go back home and get some sleep. Nick stretched and turned to walk home. After he arrived, Nick entered his room and fell onto his comfy plate of rust-free metal. His entire body relaxed as he felt the comfortable embrace of sleep take him. Several hours later, Nick woke up again. And this time he felt awake and refreshed. He slept amazingly. After he woke up, he slowly scratched the back of his head in relaxation. Man, I feel great, he thought with a yawn. So, what do I do today? After some time of thinking, Nick decided to look at the outer city. For the entire day, Nick went sightseeing in the outer city, and he learned many things. For example, he had learned how many different kinds of shops there were. There were actually shops that sold expensive stones that had no other purpose but to look nice. It was insanity. Why would anyone pay money to carry a stone with them? Nick had also learned that there were places where he could sleep without making them his home. These places were called hotels. Hotels didn't exist in the dregs since there were more houses than people, but the same thing wasn't true for the outer city. After finding out about the hotels, Nick decided to rent a room for a couple of days and got Horua to come with him. Nick didn't want to spend all his time alone, and he also wanted to have someone with him that he was familiar with. Nick even visited several restaurants, but he didn't eat at any of them. The prices were ridiculous for only a little bit of food. 10 credits for 150 grams of meat. He could get that for free by just stomping on a couple of bugs. The soup he had eaten the day before had weighed nearly a kilo, including the broth, and the ingredients had weighed over 400 grams. Eventually, Nick got some physical credits from a bank, and he ate more of the veggie cube soup with Horua. The day after that, Nick and Horua looked around the outer city some more, and finally, it was time to return to work. It was time for Horua to work with the dreamer. Chapter 43. It's great, isn't it? Nick asked. Horua just stood in front of the huge warehouse, his eyes filled with wonder. A Zephix manufacturer. He was in front of a Zephyx manufacturer and he was about to become an employee of one. Let's go in, Nick said with an encouraging smile. Right now, it was early in the morning. Nick had decided to come during the afternoon because of Horua's sleep schedule. It was better for Horua to sleep during the night, which was why they had arrived this early. Working with the Dreamer might seem like rest, but it isn't actually rest. Because of that, Nick wanted to get one session of work in before they went home to sleep. The two of them entered the warehouse and Horua looked at the huge wall of metal in front of him. Is that where it is? He asked. Nick nodded. Yep, sadly, I can't tell you any specifics without Winter. Horua just nodded, showing that he understood. A moment later, Horua noticed a tall man with light brown hair sitting in front of a desk. Right now, there were many different sheets of paper on the desk and the man was looking at them with furrowed brows. You're a bit early, Winter said with a smile, not looking up from the sheets of paper. Yep, Nick answered with a chuckle. Also, I brought someone that I want to make into one of my Zephyx extractors. Oh, Winter said as he looked up from his papers, yet when he saw the small boy, he furrowed his brows. Are you talking about him? Yep, Nick said with a nod. Nick pushed Horua forward a little bit. And Horua looked at Winter with respect and fear. Hello, sir. I want to become a Zephyx extractor, Horua said, managing not to stutter. Winter looked with an unsatisfied gaze at Horua. How old are you? 11, sir, Horua said politely. Do you have any family? Horua was a bit surprised by the question, and even Nick raised an eyebrow in confusion. And no, sir, Horua answered. I assume you are from the Dregs? Winter asked. Horua nodded. Yes, sir. Are you a member of any organization or gang? No, sir, Horua said. What's this all about? Nick asked. Why are you asking all of these questions? These questions have a purpose, Nick, Winter said without looking at him. Would anyone come searching for me if you died in here? Winter asked. This question made Horua quite nervous, and even Nick furrowed his brows. However, Nick remained quiet. No, sir, Horua said with a bit of fear and sadness. Winter continued looking at Horua with an unhappy expression. Nick? I need to speak with you privately, Winter said before standing up and walking behind the containment unit. Nick looked suspicious and unhappy, but he just followed. Horua was left alone in front of the containment unit. Nick, do you actually know what you're doing? Winter asked with a raised eyebrow. Please elaborate, Nick said. He's a kid, Nick, Winter explained. Just because you managed to withstand the Dreamer doesn't mean that everyone can. There are many cases of extractors dying while working with a specter that feeds on mentality when they actually shouldn't have. Too much stress can stop your heart or shut your brain down. I asked all these questions earlier because I wanted to make sure that no one would be searching for us in case the Dreamer killed him. Nick furrowed his brows. So, we can't employ him? He asked. Technically, that's not my decision, Winter said. Not your decision? Nick asked with a raised brow. I am the president and CEO. I don't deal with personnel issues unless they are directly related to me, Winter said. You are the chief Zephyx extractor. It is your duty to build a team of capable Zephyx extractors and assign the specters to them. If you want to employ this boy, you are free to do so. However, if something happens, that's on you. If the Dreamer accidentally kills him, it is your fault and you have to take responsibility and deal with the aftermath. When Nick heard that, he felt his chest tighten. Just now, the image of a dead Horua shot through his mind. I need to talk to him again, Nick said. All right, Winter answered neutrally. If you decide to employ him, tell me and I will give you our standard contract. Does he know anything about the Dreamer or how we obtained it? Nick shook his head. No. For some reason, Winter's eyes seemed to show some relief. Good. The next moment, the two of them walked to the front of the containment unit again. Winter went back to his desk while Nick went over to Horua. Horua looked with anxiety at Nick. Listen, Horua, Nick said. I want you to know that becoming a Zephyx extractor is not without its dangers. If you decide to become a Zephyx extractor, you might undergo a short period of horrifying pain. The pain might become so bad that you could die. Horua took a deep breath when he heard that. Your survival is not guaranteed, Horua, Nick said with a serious expression, but if you manage to survive, you will become a Zephyx extractor here. But you might also die. Are you sure you want to become a Zephyx extractor here? It is not too late to turn around, Nick said solemnly. Horua seemed quite worried as he looked at the ground. Naturally, he was very scared. I will do it. Horua said as he looked into Nick's eyes with desperation. There's nothing left for me in the Dregs. My parents are dead. I've never had siblings. I don't have a family. I don't have friends except for you. It's now or never. Nick, I want to make something of my life. Nick kept looking at Horua with a serious expression. Are you sure? He asked again. I am sure. Horua answered. I am strong and I have a lot of willpower. I can deal with pain. Some seconds passed. And then Nick nodded. Winter, give me the contract. Chapter 44. Winter looked at Horua, sighed, and handed Nick 2 sheets of paper. One of them was an NDA which made sure that Horua wouldn't tell anyone about the company's secrets, and the other one was the employee contract. Nick took the NDA and started to read it to Horua. "Nick, you don't have to read it to me, I can read myself," Horua said. Nick's eyes widened in surprise. "You can read?" he asked in shock. Horua nodded. "Father taught me when I was young." "Well, okay," Nick said as he handed the NDA over. Horua read through everything in just a couple of minutes and nodded. A moment later, he signed it. "You have no questions?" Nick asked in surprise. "I just can't tell anyone about anything specific, right?" Horua asked. Yeah, sure, that's about it," Nick said. Horua nodded and grabbed the actual contract. After reading through it, Horua became shocked. "I get to keep 10 of what I produce?" he asked. "Isn't that a lot of money?" Nick also looked at the contract since it was different from his own. Sure enough, Horua got to keep 10 of what he produced. This meant that he would get 500 credits per session with the Dreamer. Nick asked Winter about the specific split of revenue. "As the CEO and president, I get 20, Winter said. 10 go to you. 10 go to the specific extractor that produced everything. 60 go to the company as funds." Initially, Nick was a bit confused. If Horua got 10 and Nick got 10, then wouldn't Nick earn just as much as Horua? Wasn't he the chief Zephyx extractor? But then Nick realized that he would get the money without actually doing anything, and if he himself worked with the Dreamer, he would get just as much as Winter. "So, if I get more extractors, I get even more money. It's like other people are doing my work." However, Nick also wasn't super comfortable with that. "I am essentially taking money from someone without doing anything. Isn't that like stealing?" "I mean, I didn't do anything." Nick looked at the containment unit. "Although, I came up with the way to work with the Dreamer, and I was also the one that negotiated with it. So, I guess in a way I actually did do something?" Nick thought with uncertainty. "I dunno, I mean, okay, but it still feels a bit weird," he thought as he scratched the back of his head awkwardly. Eventually, Nick stopped thinking about all of the moral ramifications and just watched Horua sign the employee contract. "Good," Nick said with a bright smile as he handed the signed contract to Winter, who wordlessly put it into a briefcase beside his chair. "You're now officially one of my employees," Nick said with a bright smile. "Happy to meet you, boss." Horua shouted with a bright voice as he performed a cute salute. Nick put his hand on Horua's head and ruffled his hair a bit. "All right, then, let me tell you about what we do here and what your job will be." Horua nodded and listened with excitement. Over the next minutes, Nick told Horua everything he knew about the Dreamer. "So, I just have to sleep beside it?" Horua asked in surprise. Horua had thought that his work would be much more difficult than just sleeping. "Yep," Nick said with a smirk. "The Dreamer will even help you fall asleep. Although, you still have to be careful. After all, it is a specter." Horua blinked. "Nick, what am I supposed to do if it decides to attack me?" Nick didn't answer for a while, right? What was Horua supposed to do? Even Nick could die if the Dreamer decided to attack. What could the little Horua do? It probably won't happen," Nick said with a nervous chuckle. "It knows exactly that it can't just kill you. It wouldn't be in its best interest." Horua looked worried again. "Anyway, I think I should introduce you," Nick said as he walked towards the containment unit. "To whom?" Horua asked. "Whom?" Nick asked. "You mean who, right?" "No, it's whom," Horua answered. "To whom will you introduce me to?" "What? Why? What even is whom?" Nick asked. "I don't know, but my father always corrected me," Horua said. "Anyway, to whom?" "The Dreamer," Nick said. "Wait, what? Now?" Horua asked nervously. Nick nodded. "Yep." Horua looked around nervously, but he eventually followed Nick. "Well, you're the boss." Nick nodded and opened the employee door to the containment unit. A couple seconds later, Nick and Horua entered the containment unit. Horua was standing a bit behind Nick, but as he looked past Nick's torso, he could see the Dreamer. The black owl was standing in the corner of the room, looking into Nick's eyes. Nick had narrowed his eyes and was looking back at the Dreamer. A bit later, the Dreamer turned its head and looked at Horua. When Horua saw the Dreamer look at him, a cold shudder of terror shook his body. These eyes. For some reason, Horua felt like he was about to die. This thing was dangerous. He had to leave. He had to run. Nick noticed Horua's reaction and grabbed his arm before he could run away. Horua just kept looking at the Dreamer as his body leaned back, ready to run away as soon as he could. The Dreamer didn't show any reaction. "Horua!" Nick shouted aggressively. Horua's body shook and his terrified eyes looked at Nick. "You are now a Zephyx extractor. You have to be brave and meet the danger head-on." Horua took a deep breath and tried to calm down. However, when he looked at the Dreamer again, his fear exploded once more and he tried to pull himself out of Nick's grip. "Horua, what's going on with Arg?" Nick's question was interrupted by Horua biting Nick's hand. Naturally, Nick let go of Horua and Horua ran out of the containment unit in terror. Nick furrowed his brows and looked at his slightly bleeding hand. What the hell is wrong with him? Nick thought. Nick looked at the dreamer looked back. I'll be back soon. Then Nick walked out of the containment unit. Chapter 45. Nick left the containment unit and saw Horua trying to open the door of the warehouse. Horua. Nick shouted with anger as he ran over. When Horua heard Nick's angry voice, his entire body shuddered before freezing. Nick quickly arrived behind Horua and forcefully turned him around to face him. Horua looked into Nick's eyes with terror. What's wrong with you? Nick shouted. Horua stuttered. And no, I can't. Horua. Nick shouted again. Get a grip. It's just the dreamer. It didn't even do anything. It just looked at you. The dreamer's dead eyes shot through Horua's mind again and his body shuddered. Horua. Nick shouted again. Horua was forcefully pulled out of his terror by Nick's shout. Nick, I changed my mind. I don't want to be a Zephyx extractor anymore. I want to go home. Nick looked with shock at Horua. What? Why? You said you were willing to face the danger head-on. You said you have willpower and want a chance to make something of your life. Horua just shook his head wildly. No, I can't. I will die. I can feel it. I will die. I don't want to see this monster again. It will kill me, Nick. I can feel it. It will kill me. Horua. Nick shouted again as he shook Horua's little body a little. Calm down. You have to calm down. Surprisingly, shouting at Horua to calm down actually seemed to work and Horua took a couple of deep breaths. Nick, I can't go back in there. I will die. I know it. I feel it. Horua pleaded. Nick looked with furrowed brows at Horua. Come on, Horua, Nick said with a calmer voice. It's just a big owl. You will go to sleep, have a little nightmare, and you will wake up rich. Even more, you also get an ability since your Zephyx synchronizer will get attuned to the dreamer, Nick explained. Just one little session with the dreamer would forever change your life for the positive. Don't throw this opportunity away. Horua didn't immediately answer and he just looked at the ground in front of him. Silence. As the seconds passed, Horua's breathing quickened and his body began to shudder again. No. Horua said with conviction as he looked into Nick's eyes. I'm not going back in there. Nick looked at Horua with a concerned expression. Are you sure? Yes, I'm sure. Horua shouted. The next moment, Horua looked back at the ground. Can't we just go back home, Nick? Nick took a deep breath. I have to talk to Winter. Nick said. Thank you, Horua said quietly as he only looked at the ground in fear and shame. Even though Horua felt fearful, he also felt like he had disappointed Nick. Horua wanted to face the dreamer, but whenever he thought of the dreamer's eyes, his body and soul refused to interact with it in any way. Nick walked over to Winter and sighed. Sorry. But Horua resigns. Winter put the sheets of paper down and looked at Nick with a serious expression. The kid is a liability, Winter said. Nick sighed. I know, sorry for wasting your time. I've always seen how brave he was and I thought that he could work with the dreamer after all. The dreamer is basically just a big owl. Winter wordlessly looked into Nick's eyes with an emotionless expression. I thought he could handle it, Nick added, but in the end, he is just a child. Nick sighed. I should have known. This is my fault. Sorry. Winter kept looking at Nick. A couple of seconds of silence passed and Nick became a bit uncomfortable under Winter's emotionless gaze. I think you didn't understand what I meant, Nick, Winter said. Nick looked with a bit of confusion and worry at Winter. What do you mean? He asked. Nick, why do you think I asked the boy about his family, friends, and social circle? Winter asked. Nick's heart rate increased, but he didn't say anything. Because of you, Winter explained. If things went sour, I want the consequences to be as little and unimportant as possible. I have no issues with letting an experienced extractor resign. They have experience and are an adult. They know what it means to break an NDA. But he's just a kid. You saw what happened when he saw the dreamer. Kids don't know what they feel or think most of the time. They don't have enough experience to evaluate themselves objectively. You saw how motivated and excited he was when he told you that he would change his life and work with the dreamer, but as soon as he met him, he ran away in fear. The same might happen with the NDA. Of course, the punishment for breaking the NDA is death, but the boy isn't an adult yet. He might believe that he will get away with it as long as he makes the other person promise that they won't tell anyone else. At that point, the damage is already done. Nick's chest tightened in anxiety, but he did his best to seem calm. So, what's your plan? Nick asked. How can we solve this issue? Winter wordlessly looked into Nick's eyes again for a while. Nick's heart rate increased even more. How about making him sign another contract? Nick asked, one that makes it even more difficult to break the NDA. What about sending Pater to keep an eye on Horua? I will even pay for it with my own money. What if I just continue living with him until he becomes ready to face the dreamer for real? Winter didn't answer, he just kept looking at Nick emotionlessly. Nick, the boy is a liability. His continued existence is a danger to the company. There are only two ways this will go. 1. He does not leave this warehouse and becomes an official Zephyx extractor by working with the Dreamer. 2. I will make Pater escort him home, and on the way home, the boy will accidentally fall through the grates in the dregs. But he will be dead before he hits the water. I will not put my company in the hands of an 11-year-old child's ability to keep a secret. Chapter 46. Nick's mind nearly stopped. Horua would get killed. What? Tell me you're joking, Nick said evenly. I'm not joking, Winter said. Are you insane? Nick shouted. In the distance, Horua heard Nick and became anxious again. No, I'm not insane, Winter said calmly but forcefully. I am doing the best thing for the company. It is my job to make this company flourish and profitable. In fact, dealing with these things isn't even directly my job. It's yours. The fact that I am willing to send Pater to deal with the issue is a favor to you. It's me being lenient because you don't know how Zephyx manufacturers and the world of business work. Nick gritted his teeth. You're willing to just fucking kill a kid? Now he's a kid? Winter asked with annoyance. Earlier, you hired him like he was a proper adult. You treated him like an adult, so he has to take responsibility for his actions like an adult. He fulfills his contract or bears the consequences, Winter said. He's fucking 11, Winter. Nick almost shouted. You are willing to kill an 11-year-old kid for your business? Our business. Nick, Winter said. Also, you are not much better. You were willing to make a kid work with a specter, the natural enemy of humanity and the most dangerous existence in the world. I warned you, Winter shouted slightly. I told you that this is your responsibility, but as soon as anything goes wrong, you don't have the maturity to deal with it. I'm the one that has to deal with this issue now. Because you were unable to do your job properly, I now have to give the order to kill a kid. Do you think this is easy for me? Do you think I'm some kind of cold machine that can't feel anything? I don't want to fucking kill the kid as well, but I fucking have to. If I don't, everything I have sacrificed for this business will be for nothing. Even more, how do you think Pater will feel? Pater has been trained to deal with these things, but he has never killed a mere kid before. This will also mess him up for a long time. Because you can't deal with your own mistakes, 2 other people have to suffer. Your stupidity, indecisiveness, and mental weakness are why Pater and I have to go through shit now. Even more, if you had simply decided against hiring him after I warned you, he also wouldn't need to die, Winter shouted. Then why didn't you stop me? Nick shouted back. Because it's your responsibility, Winter said with an aggressive tone. You are my chief Zephyx extractor. You are a leader. You are a manager. This is the difference between a Zephyx extractor and a chief Zephyx extractor. Responsibility. If an extractor dies, it's your fault. Your processes were not good enough, or you chose the wrong person, or you have forced someone to work at the wrong time. If something happens to an extractor or a specter, you are always at least partially responsible. You make the decisions. You have all the freedom. But if something goes wrong, it's on you. Nick gritted his teeth. He acknowledged that what Winter said made sense and that he was right, but Horua was just a child. No matter how responsible Nick felt, it simply felt wrong to kill a child. Nick clenched his fists with all of his power, the pain making it a bit easier to think. Deal with the issue, Winter commanded as he sat down again. If you need Pater to take action, tell me. I gave you this position because I felt like I could trust you, and because I felt like you have the talent and mentality for it. Don't betray my trust in you, Winter said. Nick didn't answer and just gnashed his teeth as he gazed fixedly at the desk. At this moment, Nick was overwhelmed by a tsunami of rage, frustration, guilt, fear, uncertainty, and helplessness. I was the one that hired him, Nick thought with pain. I was the one that made the decision. However, Nick thought as he looked at Winter again. Winter, Nick slowly said. Winter didn't answer. Yes, it is my responsibility, Nick said. However, why didn't you tell me what would happen if Horua decided to resign? I know you didn't need to, but I feel like this could have been avoided if you had just told me. Winter didn't answer for several seconds. I needed you to learn, Winter said. I had to show you what kind of power you have. and I needed to show you what would happen if you used it irresponsibly. Right now, the company is still new, and our survival is not yet intrinsically connected to the success. If anything goes wrong now, I can still rectify it." After that, Winter turned silent. Nick took a deep breath. In the end, it's my fault, Nick thought. I should have known that Horua wasn't able to make such a big choice. I should have never told him that he would become a Zephix extractor. Nick took another deep breath as he turned to look at the distant Horua. The next moment, Nick gritted his teeth and narrowed his eyes. "And it is my responsibility to deal with the issue. I'm so sorry, Horua." Nick walked over to Horua. When Horua saw Nick's expression, he became terrified and froze. Nick grabbed Horua's arm and pulled him towards the containment unit. Horua's face immediately turned white, and his body began to shake. "No! No, Nick! What are you doing?" Nick gritted his teeth more. "I'm sorry, Horua, but you have to work with the dreamer," Nick said with a dark tone. No, Nick, I don't want to. Please." Horua screamed as he tried his best to free himself from Nick's grip. "I'm sorry," Nick repeated. "I also don't want to do this. But I'm only doing this for your own good. You can hate me if you want. But right now, I need you to work with the dreamer." "No, please, no," Horua shouted as he started to bite Nick's hand. Nick began to bleed, but he just kept pulling Horua. Nick opened the door to the dreamer, and when it opened fully, Nick pushed Horua in before walking in himself. The next second, the door closed behind him. Chapter 47. "No, Nick, I'm sorry. Please, let me go," Horua shouted in panic as he tried to get past Nick. Nick just shoved Horua forward, making him fall on his ass. "This is for your own good, Horua," Nick said with a serious tone. "You have to work with the dreamer. You have to." Horua could feel the dead eyes of the dreamer on his back, causing his mind to spiral further into panic. "I can't. No," Horua shouted as he tried to leave again. Nick gritted his teeth and pushed Horua away again. "I don't want to do this either, but you have to," Nick said. "Why? Why do I have to?" Horua asked in a mix of betrayal, rage, and terror. "What did I ever do to you? I thought we were friends." Nick didn't immediately answer. "I can't tell Horua that Winter would have killed him if he left. If he knows, he will become enraged and do something stupid. He might try to cause Winter as much damage as possible, which would be spreading all secrets that Horua knows. I can't let him do that. Not because it will hurt Winter, but because it will mean that Horua will die. Horua is a kid, and it's my fault that I didn't see that sooner. If he gets too angry, all of this suffering will be for nothing, and he will die anyway. I can't allow Horua to die. And for that, I have to be the bad guy. It's my responsibility anyway. It's only right that I also pay the price." "This is for your future, Horua," Nick shouted. "You do not know how lucky you have been in the dregs until now. If you don't take the plunge now, you will forever remain in the dregs." "You're lying," Horua shouted back. "You were willing to let me go, but then you talked to that other guy, and now you're suddenly forcing me to do this. It's him, isn't it? He's the one that forces you to force me." Nick grew more anxious and gritted his teeth even more. Bang! Horua felt like the world was turning. The next moment, he felt himself hitting the ground. Horua's world spun, and it took a while for him to think clearly again. That's when he saw it. Bloodteeth Nick had backhanded Horua, breaking 3 of his teeth in the process. Luckily, the 3 teeth were still baby teeth, which meant that the real teeth were still there yet. Horua still felt an incredible amount of pain at this moment, but stronger than the pain was the shock Nick had hit him. Nick had never hit him before. Even more, this wasn't just an innocent slap. No, this was a strong backhand that caused Horua to bleed. "You will thank me later," Nick coldly said. Yet, contrary to how Nick appeared on the outside, he actually felt absolutely disgusted with what he was saying and portraying. "Thank me later?" As if, Nick thought with gritted teeth. "If I were him, I would hate me for the rest of my life. I'm not his family, and I've only been his friend for a couple of months. I have no right to force him to do any of this." Nick took a deep breath, but he made it seem like he was breathing in deeply out of frustration and anger. I'm so sorry, Horua. Nick slowly walked forward. Bang! And Nick kicked Horua towards the middle of the containment unit. I'm sorry. Horua rolled into the middle of the containment unit as he looked with pure shock at Nick. It was like Nick had transformed into someone he had never seen before. Is this who he really is? Horua thought in fear, shock, and betrayal. Was everything else just an act? Did he just want me to sign the contract so that he can force me to do things? Is this who you really are? Yet, Horua didn't say anything. Silence. Go work with the dreamer, Nick said coldly. I will stay here until you're done. At that moment, Horua remembered that he was in the containment unit of the dreamer and slowly turned around. Just 2 meters behind Horua was the dreamer. It hadn't moved until now, and it was still looking at Horua with its dead eyes. Horua's mind froze, his heart rate shot past 200 beats per minute, and his world began to swim. Horua started to breathe very rapidly, which only increased his dizziness, and then he fell over. Horua had lost consciousness due to his overwhelming shock and fear. When the dreamer saw that, it slowly turned to look at Nick. He will be working with us from now on, Nick said slowly. You are allowed to feed off him for the next 8 hours, and if he survives, he will continue to work with you. If he doesn't, I will be the only one working with you from now on. If everything goes well, I will also search for a third person to work with you. Don't do anything stupid, Nick said coldly. The dreamer slowly turned to look at Horua again. Then it slowly walked towards Horua's head and it stopped. The dreamer simply stood beside Horua's head and looked fixedly at his closed eyes. A moment later, Horua's eyelids twitched, but at that moment Nick noticed that the prefix in the containment unit increased. Nick only hoped that this increase didn't mean that the dreamer wanted to attack. Luckily, the increase of the prefix didn't sound the alarm, and Horua's eyelids calmed down. 2 seconds later, Horua's breathing changed and his body involuntarily moved into a more comfortable position. He was asleep. When Nick saw that, he sighed and sat down in front of the door. For a while, Nick just took some shaky breaths and he slowly put his head in his hands. The dreamer started to feed. The Zephyx container was being filled, yet Nick wasn't happy, not even one bit. Chapter 48. In the containment unit, Nick simply sat on the ground, unmoving. He didn't say anything. I'm so sorry, Horua. Nick didn't move. I'm sorry. I should have known that things wouldn't be so easy. Even though the dreamer is not very scary for a specter, it is still a specter. And you're a kid. How could I ever think that a child would be able to work with a specter? I'm stupid. I'm fucking retarded. I'm so sorry. I was the one that fucked up and now you have to pay the price. This is all my fault, Horua. Nick's limbs shook in frustration, guilt, and rage. I feel so horrible. Please, Horua, when you wake up, don't do anything stupid. You can hate me. You can ignore me. You can try to ruin me. I'm fine with everything. But please, don't try to ruin the business or Winter. Because if you do that, you will die. As Nick continued to think about everything, his own reality also finally set in. Actually, I think I'm in a similar position to Horua. Winter made me his chief Zephyx extractor. If I were to betray him, I would also be killed off. Nick's fists clenched. Winter is a cold and calculating businessman. He eliminates everyone that goes against him. If I were to tell anyone anything confidential, I would be dead within the day. Slowly, rage and fear also joined Nick's emotions. Winter, I know that this is my responsibility, but you knew that this would happen. You might have even wanted this to happen. After all, you said that you wanted me to learn. Nick gritted his teeth in anger, but then a scene appeared in Nick's mind. The scene depicted Winter standing behind Nick as he blinded the dreamer. In that scene, Winter was completely drenched in sewer water. Nick remembered how difficult it had been for Winter to jump in, and he also remembered how much Winter had suffered after he had left the sewer again. He only did that because he wanted to catch the dreamer. Nick thought with hatred, yet, the more time passed, the more Nick felt like he didn't truly believe that. Did Winter truly only do this because of the dreamer? Actually, probably not. It wasn't certain that I would die. There was a good chance that I would manage to swim towards the entrance of the sewers, where Winter was standing. Then Winter would have been able to help me without jumping into the sewers. There had been a good 30 meters between the place where Nick had been and the entrance of the sewers. For Winter to swim that far, he must have jumped into the sewers nearly half a minute before he had arrived at Nick's side. Nick put his hands on his knees and violently grabbed them in frustration. He's not cold, Nick thought. He might appear cold now, but people only show their true faces when they are in a stressful or dangerous situation. When it was important, Winter was willing to jump into the sewers to save me. It might have also been in his own best interest, but it still must have been very difficult. Right now, he's only cold because he needs to be. This is his job. Like he said, deciding to kill Horua probably also heavily weighs on his mind. And yet, he still talked normally with me and he didn't say anything out of line. I fucked up and Winter has to suffer because of it. But he only reprimanded me. Horua suffers because of me. Winter suffers because of me. If things go badly, even Pater will suffer because of me. I was the one that made the decision to get Horua. Winter warned me, but I didn't listen. This is all because of me. At this moment, most of Nick's emotions vanished, replaced by only two emotions, guilt and determination. This is my fault. And it is my job to rectify these issues. No matter what I have to do or what it will cost. Nick looked forward again. The dreamer was still standing beside the sleeping Horua. At this moment, Horua looked like he was peacefully sleeping. It's not that bad, Horua, you will just have some bad dreams and wake up. It won't be as bad as you imagined it to be. And when you wake up, you will officially be a Zephix extractor. You will have an actual future and you will gain powerful abilities. I know things will only improve for you. Sadly, I won't be part of that future. I know you hate me. Nick took a shaky breath and I'm fine with it. That's the price I must pay. I don't deserve forgiveness for what I've done. Nick just continued looking at Horua. The memories of what Nick had done to Horua became hazier and hazier. It was almost like all of this hadn't happened. It was like nothing had changed. Yet, whenever Nick looked at Horua and the dreamer, he was reminded of reality. It had happened, but it didn't feel like it had happened. After a while, Nick put his head in his hands again. Silence. Nick didn't move. Time passed. Nick had plenty of time and opportunity to think about what he had done. In this containment unit, there was nothing for Nick to do and he had to remain here for 8 hours. Paradoxically, it felt like the longest and the shortest 8 hours of Nick's life. On one hand, Nick felt like time was dragging on forever. But on the other hand, Nick despaired at the rapid passage of time. He didn't want to see how Horua would react when he woke up. It was torture. However, it wouldn't be 8 hours until things changed. After just 5 hours, something happened. CRK. CRK. Nick heard something and looked over. He saw the dreamer take a couple of steps back as it retreated back into its corner. For just a moment, Nick was confused, but the next moment, Horua's body suddenly started to shake violently. Nick's eyes widened. He's having a seizure. Chapter 49. When Nick saw the seizure, he realized why the dreamer had retreated. The dreamer was showing that it wasn't trying to kill Horua. It was just that Horua wasn't strong enough to resist whatever the dreamer was showing him. When he had still been here, Albert had told Nick about some potential dangers. Albert had said that working with the dreamer could be dangerous, but it shouldn't be. Since the dreamer was only feeding on mentality, actual injuries were not a thing, and since everyone would forget the dreams they had, mental problems also shouldn't be a thing. The only dangerous part was during the dreams. If someone was pushed too far in a dream, their mind might actually shut down. At that point, their bodily functions might stop working. But Albert said that it would be difficult to notice someone dying like that. Nick thought, he said that they would die quietly. Yet, Horua is definitely not dying quietly. That means I still have a chance to save him. Nick shot to his feet and jumped to Horua's side. The dreamer just looked at Nick from its corner with its dead eyes. Horua started to froth at the mouth and his body was making sounds as it slapped against the ground. Horua. Nick shouted as he lightly slapped his cheeks. Nick had seen seizures in the dregs, but he had no idea how to deal with them. What was he supposed to do? Was he supposed to keep him steady so that he didn't injure himself? Was he supposed to slap him awake? Horua, hold on. Nick shouted in fear, you're still alive. Horua, you're awake. It was all a dream, Horua. Please. But Horua just continued seizing. The next moment, a disgusting greenish-brown liquid appeared in Horua's throat. Puke. Nick watched as the puke bubbled in Horua's throat. At the same time, Nick heard the sound of Horua desperately trying to breathe. He's asphyxiating on his puke. Nick immediately grabbed Horua and lifted him up by his legs. Then Nick began to shake Horua to get all the puke to come out. The puke was leaving Horua's mouth and nose. Please, Horua. Wake up. Nick was in a panic as he put Horua down again. The shaking had gotten weaker. Nick just hoped that this was a sign of recovery, not death. After some seconds, Horua's half-closed eyes just quietly looked at the ceiling of the containment unit. They didn't move. Nick looked with terror at Horua. Please be alive. Please be alive. Please be alive. Nick repeated in his mind, Horua. Horua, are you okay? Nick asked with a worried voice as he lightly tapped Horua's cheek. Please, don't die. Please. Nick just looked at Horua. Horua didn't do anything for several seconds. Slowly, Nick moved forward and put his head on Horua's chest. His heart is still beating, Nick thought with relief. The next moment, Nick held his hand in front of Horua's mouth. He's also breathing. Nick released a sigh of relief. He's still alive. At this moment, Nick's taut emotions finally relaxed, but he still felt a bit nervous about Horua's state. Nick gently lifted Horua and left the containment unit. The dreamer was just watching Nick silently when Nick went out of the containment unit. He saw Winter looking up from his desk and walking over. When Winter saw the limp Horua, he knew that something must have gone wrong. What happened? Winter asked. Nick took a deep breath and related everything that had happened to Winter. Winter's expression became darker the more he heard. It sounds like he has suffered severe mental damage. Winter said. What will happen to him? Nick asked. We don't know. Winter said. You don't know. Nick asked with an anxious voice. Everyone reacts differently to severe mental stress. Winter added. My teacher only went over a couple of outcomes back then. However, one thing is certain. He needs to see a doctor, Winter explained. Then let's go to one. Nick said urgently. Winter put his hand on Nick's shoulder, stopping him from leaving. Nick, calm down. Winter, I need calm down. Winter shouted. Nick took a deep breath. Yes, what? He asked. Nick, we are not going out to get a doctor. The doctors come to us. First, Nick wanted to shout in aggression, but then his eyes widened. They come to us? He asked. Winter nodded. Pater. Winter shouted, coming. Pater shouted from a distant spot where he was cleaning the floor. Yes, sir. Pater asked, get a physician from the closest clinic to come here. Winter ordered. This boy has received heavy mental damage from a specter. When Pater heard that, he took in a deep breath. He looked at Horua in shock and then looked at Winter. Pater was amazing at keeping a poker face, but Winter had still noticed that Pater's expression had become colder as he looked at Winter. Of course, sir. Pater said before dashing out of the warehouse. Winter turned to Nick, put him to the side. He said as he pointed to one of the walls. Nick nodded. Thank you. Winter, he said quietly as he walked to one of the walls with Horua. Winter just sighed. What's there to thank for? Nick didn't put Horua down but simply sat down with him still in his arms. Several minutes passed before Pater returned with someone. It was a relatively young woman with green hair who was wearing a white coat. Pater led the woman to Nick. When Nick saw her, his breathing quickened. He hoped Horua was okay. Please, help him, Nick said in fear. The doctor looked at Horua and her eyes became visibly cold and distant. Such a young boy, she was disgusted by this company. After all, how could a child enter a containment unit on their own? Yet, the expression of the man in front of her spoke of genuine worry and fear. This told the doctor basically what had happened. Stupidity had happened. Put him down, she commanded coldly. Chapter 50. Nick quickly put Horua down and stepped back. Right now, Nick only hoped that Horua would survive. The doctor took out a small bag with different medical equipment and slowly took out some kind of tool that she put on Horua's chest. Half a minute later, she put the tool away again and put some other tool around Horua's arm for a while. After that, she used a light to look into Horua's vacant eyes. The more time passed, the stronger her frown became. What's his name? She asked. Horua, Nick answered. Horua, can you hear me? She asked in a friendly manner as she looked into Horua's eyes. Horua didn't answer. A moment later, she shined her light into Horua's eyes again. I know you're awake, Horua, she said. Your pupils are constricting when I shine my light into them. That only happens when you are conscious. Horua didn't do anything. For several minutes, the doctor kept talking to Horua as she touched different parts of his body, yet Horua never showed any reaction. A bit later, the doctor actually slowly lifted Horua's arm and let go. Nick's eyes widened when he saw that the arm didn't fall. The arm actually remained in the air. Horua? Nick asked with hope. However, the doctor just furrowed her brows. The next moment, she snapped her fingers a couple of times in front of Horua's face, and she even acted like she was about to snip Horua's eyes. No reaction. Eventually, she only sighed and slowly lifted Horua into a sitting position and leaned him against the wall. I need to talk to the two of you, the doctor said as she stood up. Nick knew that she was referring to Winter and him. Of course, Nick said. Nick walked over to Winter, and the doctor followed him. Winter looked at the doctor with a neutral expression. What's the diagnosis? First, I need to know what happened, the doctor answered. I know that Zephix manufacturers are very secretive, which is why I only need a rough explanation. Winter nodded. Of course. Wait, Nick said, interrupting Winter. The two of them looked at Nick. I will tell her, Nick said with a deep breath. After all of this is my fault. Winter looked at Nick for a bit but nodded. Then, Nick told the doctor about his idea to make Horua a Zephix extractor so that he would have a future outside of the dregs. The doctor was disgusted by Nick, but she kept a professional demeanor. At least he feels guilty, she thought with a snort. When it came to the dreamer, Nick only said that Horua had a nightmare. A nightmare? The doctor asked. A nightmare or the nightmare? A nightmare, Nick answered. You know, a bad dream. The doctor frowned and became quiet. That explains some things, she said. With all of this information, I can be more certain in my diagnosis. Nick and even Winter listened intently. The boy, Horua, is awake currently, the doctor explained. His reflexes and autonomous bodily functions are working fine. This means he won't just die suddenly or stop breathing. When Nick heard that, he released a sigh of relief. At least Horua wouldn't die, but... Winter asked, but the doctor continued, his mind has become isolated. His actual consciousness does not interact with the outside world anymore. That means his mind doesn't get new information and also can't share information with others. You could say he is conscious but sleeping. In a way, although this is a strong simplification of what is actually happening. Nick looked with worry at the doctor as Winter frowned. What does that mean? He asked. It means he will continue being in this state for an indeterminate amount of time. The doctor said he won't move on his own. This means he can't eat, drink, or go to the toilet on his own. The only thing he can do is sleep. Nick took a deep breath. Can we do anything about this? He asked. It's difficult, the doctor said. Since we can't really interact with his consciousness, we can't solve the issue. This is a mental problem, and if we want to save him, we need to somehow wake his mind up. The doctor sighed. Sadly, that's very difficult. After all, information can only enter a mind when the owner of the mind actively absorbs it. We can't just force his mind to listen. Nick felt his chest tighten. Is there anything I can do to save him? Maybe one of the recovery baths. No, the doctor said. Things like recovery baths work on injuries, and Horua technically isn't injured. In a certain way, nothing is wrong with his body. The only thing you can do is to keep him alive, talk to him, and hope that he wakes up on his own. He might wake up tomorrow. He might wake up in a week. He might wake up in a year. Maybe in 10 years. Maybe never. Nick looked at the ground with a horrified expression. This was difficult to come to terms with. Horua had turned into this, and it was Nick's fault. What if he comes into contact with the specter again? Winter asked. The doctor's expression became strict and chilly. If it's a specter that feeds on mentality, it can probably change things in Horua's mind, but specters that help people are not very common. But could it help? Winter asked. The doctor didn't answer for a couple of seconds. Yes, but the chances are higher that his mental state will worsen or that he will die, the doctor said coldly. Winter nodded. Thank you, you can send the bill to us later. The doctor tried her best not to snort. Doctor, how can I keep Horua alive? Nick asked. The doctor glanced at Nick with a neutral expression. 3 meals a day that are easy to digest and swallow, 2 liters of water a day, regular change of clothes. His bodily waste needs to be cleaned regularly. Once every 2 days, you have to wash him. Thrice a day, you have to massage his legs and arms, or he will die of a thrombus. A thrombus? Nick asked in confusion. Even Winter didn't know what that was. If you don't move your extremities for a long time, your blood vessels get constricted and a clot can form in one of them when the extremity gets moved. The clot travels through the vessels and can get stuck in your heart, lungs, or anywhere else. That part will essentially not get any air and die off, killing you with it. If you want to keep him alive, you need to do all of that.